Hey everyone, today we're gonna take a look at the Marvel Legends Deluxe 6-inch Lizard action figure on the Spider-Man Retro Cardback series. As usual, please like, share, comment, subscribe, or hit that super thanks button. I appreciate all engagement. Now let's have a quick look at the front of the card. Up top we have the really beautiful retro Spider-Man logo. On the left side we have artwork of the lizard. The interesting thing is that the lab coat is drawn tattered on the bottom, which is not really comic accurate and also doesn't look like the figure, but it's not a big deal. On the front of the plastic bubble, we also see the Spider-Man 60th anniversary logo sticker. The figure is nicely displayed. He's got an alternate head, 2 flasks, a tail, as well as 2 interchangeable hands. Now we move on to the back of the card. Some line work instructions to show you how to swap the heads and hands. The same artwork of the lizard, character description over here, and finally product information at the bottom. So let's go ahead and get this figure open. To get the figure out of the packaging, I simply slice the plastic bubble off the retro card back using a hobby knife. Technically not an accessory, we first look at his tail, and this would form part of his body. The tail has got nice sculpting all over it. It's made of a soft, flexible green plastic. The sculpting also captures all the nice reptilian scales, and there are also segments in the tail. So that's nice detail for a reptilian tail, and probably also allows it to bend much better. There's a dark green wash all over this plastic tail. Once again, the green wash also brings out all the nice sculpting work. On the bottom of the tail, he's got all those segments of scales sculpted in as well. So that's a really nice contrast between the bottom and the top of the tail. It's a soft, flexible plastic, and there's a metal wire inside, so you can bend and pose the tail as you desire. And naturally, that brings a lot of elements of posability for this figure in the tail. There's a hole at the top of the tail, and that goes into the purple peg on his butt. The sculpt of the coat is rounded, so it nicely falls over the tail. And of course, that tail also articulates at the peg where it bends, so you can swing it around for different angles. Naturally, with the tail on, it pushes the balance of the figure backwards, so I tend to pose it like this, providing an additional support so the figure stands up just fine. He's got 2 interchangeable hands that are cast in the green plastic, a left gripping hand as well as a right fist. Likewise, these hands are nicely sculpted with a nice reptilian scaly texture. The texture is also similarly brought out with a dark green overwash. But these hands are strangely sculpted without fingernails or claws, so that makes them look just a little weird. These hands come with hinges so they articulate inwards as well as outwards. And of course, these hands pop onto the figure just fine. My only gripe would be that this figure coming in at the deluxe price point should have come with 2 complete sets of fists as well as gripping hands. Next up, the 2 flasks are cast in a transparent plastic. The conical flask has a red insert, while the round bottom boiling flask has a yellow insert. These are probably just to look like the chemicals that the lizard is mixing up. The 2 flasks also do come with holes at the top. So these holes are a great way to insert the smoke effects that came with figures like the Walgreens, Jigsaw, and the deluxe Black Widow from the movie. And the lizard can hold on to these flasks, whether it's with his gripping hand or his default open hands. And finally, he does come with a nice head sculpt with a more realistic reptilian look to it. It's sculpted in a green plastic, once again also having that reptilian scaly texture, and also clearly different types of scales for his lips. Once again, it's also given a dark green wash all over that sculpt to really bring out all those textures and scales. I like his piercing yellow eyes. These are also sharply painted, with a very reptilian skinny black iris. What's not so good about this head sculpt is the white paint for his teeth. It does appear applied quite thickly, which is necessary to make sure that the teeth do appear white on top of the green plastic. However, with thickly applied paint, it could also turn out looking a little sloppy, and I've seen a couple of copies with quite sloppy white paint on the teeth. The teeth themselves are sculpted with a very sharp sculpt, looking very menacing, and in his mouth he's got a pink plastic tongue that's inserted. The tongue is sculpted in a soft, flexible plastic with a forked sculpt at the end. I really like how this head sculpt looks. I also want to point out the good work in sculpting that snout on the front of the head. However, I do think that without a hinge for the jaw, it is a missed opportunity. And his mouth is sculpted stuck in this position. You're not able to remove the tongue and close his mouth. As you would expect, the alternate head sculpt does pop onto that body just fine. However, I will say that since the alternate head sculpt is manufactured separately from the body, the dark green wash doesn't always match up to the neck, so that's slightly distracting. The figure is a brand new sculpt. Couple of improvements are like the ball joint now is at the mid-torso, while the hinge is at his hips. It also has the improved pinless joint system, so you don't see any of those distracting pins, whether on his elbows or around his knees. I was also slightly disappointed to see that he's using a sculpted plastic lab coat. Once again, it also feels a little bit like a missed opportunity for Hasbro to introduce the soft fabric lab coat, like they're gonna do with the new retro carded Beast figure. However, I do feel less bad about it because now the coat seems to be improved because it's now using a softer, more flexible plastic, unlike the rigid, thicker plastic that we've seen on other figures' coats or capes. So this one feels fairly soft and hopefully doesn't get in the way of the posing and articulation. Zooming into his head sculpt, and it is very ridiculous looking. And I do mean that in the most charming way. It's faithful to the way he looks in the older comics, with a more simplistic look for his eyes that are simply just painted in white and a simple black dot for his iris. It does also have good sculpting work. Once again, skills for the reptilian texture brought out by the dark green overwash. There's also distinct sculpting for the scales around his lips and also larger scales on the top of his head. There's also a sculpted tongue in the inside of his mouth. The tongue is now instead painted in a glossy pink paint. So even though the plastic is flexible, once again it also doesn't really have a hinge over here. So this head sculpt is just stuck with his mouth open all the time. And this adds to the hilarity of the expression on his face. That expression looks like he's shocked, or incredulous, or just simply dazed out. So I think this head sculpt looks really ridiculous, it's hilarious, and there's plenty of meme potential. We go down to his neck now, and it's also got that same reptilian sculpting. Once again, that sculpting work is also brought out by the dark green wash, and you can see that the scales on the front of his neck differ from the scales on the back of his neck, in very much the same way that the reptilian scales look different on the top and the bottom of reptilian bodies. The white lab coat has got good sculpting work as well, for a popped up high collar, as well as sculpting for details like the front pocket, as well as the buttons down the front of the coat. There's also a couple of wrinkles for folds in the fabric. The soft, flexible lab coat does come off to reveal a torso that's cast in a black plastic. The black plastic torso does have a little bit of texture sculpted on it to show a little bit of that t-shirt fabric, as well as lines for folds in the shirt. His arms are sculpted in a white plastic to match the lab coat. But once you come down to his forearm, the top part of it is cast in a white plastic, and then the bottom part of the forearm is cast in a darker green plastic with the reptilian scale textures and green wash once again. And I like the sculpting work for the wrinkles in the fabric at his sleeves, as well as the bottoms where it's ripped off. Once again, his default hands are also sculpted without fingernails or claws, but they do have nice sculpting work for the scales both on the insides and the back of his hand. On the back of the figure, once again we also see the same sculpting work. This time there's more muscle definition on his back. His crotch piece is cast in a purple plastic with black paint just to finish off the bits of his shirt down the side. The sculpting around the crotch piece for where you connect the tail does look a little odd, simply having this circular port instead of having ripped fabric for the pants where his tail grows out of. There's also sculpting work for the belt loops on his crotch piece for where his pants and details like the button and zip fly over here. The rest of his legs are cast similarly in a purple plastic, and at the bottom of his pants they are ripped, and you have the green plastic inserts for the lower half of his calf. Once again, also nice sculpting work with the reptilian scales and the dark green wash to bring out all those textures. Now as for articulation, first off, I really like how they've designed his neck. It's got the ball hinge at the top with another ball joint at the bottom of the neck. So of course, that means you can spin his head 360. The two joints work together just great to have some sideways tilting going on as well. And the up and down range is great because you can make him look down all the way into his chest, but also hinge his head up to pretty extreme angles, and this would be really useful for crawling poses. His shoulders have the regular swivel and hinge, so it goes all the way around, as well as coming out quite a good bit beyond 90 degrees. He's got a bicep swivel so that spins 360, double jointed pinless elbows, and that gives you very good range so he can even touch his own shoulder. Swivel hinge at the wrist for 360 swivel, as well as bending in and out. Mid-torso ball joint, so that lets you spin his torso all the way around 360. The flexible plastic lap coat also spins over his tail without hindering any of that 360 swivel. The ball joint also affords you a bit of sideways tilting going on, and combined with that hinge at his waist, you can get quite a good bit of forward bend, and the backward bend is also pretty great, not really hindered much by that flexible plastic lap coat. Ball joints at the hips that go out sideways just that much. They also go forward and backward. However, I will say that the sculpt is a bit hindering down the front, and that limits the forward range a little bit. He's got a thigh swivel, so that spins 360. Double jointed pinless knees, very good range. I like that the calf swivel is well disguised by the sculpt of the ripped pants, and that means you can spin it 360. And finally at the ankles, he's got upward tilt as well as downwards, and also a good bit of ankle pivot outwards as well as inwards. Naturally, the tail brings the balance of the figure backwards, but it's possible to bend him forward as well as swish that tail a little more upwards so you can balance him much better, and that's also helped by the good scheme of articulation that this figure has. However, once again, in this pose we see the limitations of a sculpted plastic lab coat, which just sticks out really awkwardly and unnaturally in more dynamic poses. I must compliment Hasbro for the bendy posable tail, because now you can achieve more natural poses with the tail, including some S curves. And I also really like the impressive articulation in the head, because now the figure looks really great, especially in crawling poses when he's coming after and chasing Spider-Man. The lizard figure stands at almost 6.5 inches, and that's about 16 centimeters. His fully extended tail is also quite long and measures 6.5 inches, and that's about 16.5 centimeters. The lizard stands slightly bigger than recent Spider-Man action figures, and this is consistent with his more classic reptilian humanoid representation, instead of his more modern, bulky crocodilian look. And for that reason, I really don't mind that he's a slimmer, more compact action figure. The lizard sizes up quite well among other Spider-Man villains. Here he is with some G.I. Joe Classified series and some Star Wars Black series. The lizard figure is a good representation of his classic appearance and is quite well designed. To really elevate this figure, he could have come with articulated jaws, a full set of gripping hands and fists, and a soft fabric lab coat. Still, I quite like the dark green wash on the figure, which brings out the reptilian scales, and the scheme of articulation makes it fun to pose. The default head sculpt is also super goofy and a nice homage. So in summary, I strongly recommend this figure for your Spider-Man villains collection. Please like and share this video, let me know what you think in the comments below, and subscribe to my channel, or even hit that super thanks button. Thanks for watching, take care and stay safe.